I try to keep Ralph Nader, with whom I worked when I first went to Washington, on one shoulder and the food industry on another shoulder. Ralph wagging his finger at me saying, "You're not going far enough, Michael." And the food industry saying, we're going to find everything possible wrong with whatever you're saying. And so we try to be right. That's one thing. And we also stick to the science. We don't bullshit. We don't make things up. We don't pretend things are what we wish they were, but we accept what they are and try to go from there. And so the food industry, government, and journalists trust us because we stick to the facts and we don't try to trick people. Now somebody's going to prove me wrong. Yeah.
Hi, Rachel Carmody. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Systems Biology here. I recently participated in a conference looking at how energy values are calculated for food labels. And one of the things that came out of our symposium is that even when the science is implemented correctly, so for example, when the Atwater system is used to determine the calorie values that get reported on these labels, that they can be incorrect. And so I'm wondering, in the context of these kinds of improvements to the nutrient facts panel, which you're talking about, which I think are great, how do you interpret correctly whether something is good for someone, something is of medium nutrient value, or something is, unhealthy, when even when the science is implemented correctly, it can be wrong?
Well, I think that for calorie labels, calories is one aspect, and maybe they're a little wrong, but in the greater scheme of things, it probably doesn't matter all that much. And like with menu labeling at restaurants, the numbers aren't going to be exactly right, but kind of within some range, they'll be pretty good. And it's the same thing with a lot of these, like with saturated fat. There are different saturated fats. Some are not terribly harmful, others are more harmful. So there are compromises, and that gets to the issue of how much complexity can you stand? And so I like a system that's one number, like 0 to 100, or either a binary, it's on the label or it's not on the label. Something pretty simple, because the nutrition facts label is really complicated. I see a lot of people looking at the package, and some people are probably really studying the numbers to try to figure out, does it have enough protein compared to the calories? And other people are looking at it and saying, what the hell are all these numbers doing here? They have no idea what it is. So they're compromises. And then also, if you want to make it worse, individual variability. Should a label be connected to your an analysis of your genes to know what it really means for you? Yes.
Hi, Lorian Urban from the Tufts Friedman School of Nutrition Science and Policy. I know that litigation has been a major tool that CSPI has used, and I'm just wondering if there are other tools in your kit that have been successful, or if you think litigation is the only way to go. Oh
no, litigation is not the only way to go, and it's not the best way either, because it's labor intensive, and we can only go after one product at a time. Pressuring regulatory agencies is a way to go. Getting legislation is important. Sometimes getting states to act can be a catalyst. So on menu labeling, we got laws passed in first New York City, and then there was a different law passed in California, and then Seattle had a quite different law, and that helped force industry to the table to accept a federal law. But there are a bunch of tools. The internet. With this morning, Good Morning America featured a petition that was on Change.org to try to force Kraft to get rid of Yellow 5 and Yellow 6 from their macaroni and cheese. So just publicity occasionally. Now Kraft is not crumbling under that pressure, but that's another thing. And publicity is important. And academic papers are very important to provide a basis for, to provide a foundation on which the same or other people can demand that the government do something. All of those things are hard. Education is easy. We can spew out booklets and all that stuff, and it's useful, but it's so low leverage. But the high leverage things take huge, huge effort and persistence. And that's another thing, Louisa, the persistence that we've been lucky to have some of the same staff people for. Our nutritionist has been with us since 1978, and other people have been with us 15 or 20 years. And so all that institutional memory is very valuable.
Time for one more question. Sorry.
Hi, Elena Mahaly. I'm coming from Vermont Law School. I'm a student there. I'm curious, you were talking about enforcement and specifically talking about how FDA's food division is pitiful and how they don't have, well, they claim they don't have the resources to enforce it. And then there's your organization out there doing some enforcement as well. And I'm curious, this isn't the first time I've heard complaints from an organization about an agency's ability to enforce their regulations. And I'm curious if you can just touch on what you feel like is the most effective dance between the agency and an organization like yours, and how do you create the most effective patchwork of enforcement?
Well, one thing is just simply to talk to the agency and understand what some of their constraints are, or encourage them to take action. And we succeeded in getting the FDA to do that little spurt a few years ago. Another thing would be to get members of Congress to pressure the agency, to have a hearing, put something in an appropriations bill to push them further. And I've heard the previous speaker, Professor Roberts, mention Peter Hutt, who was with the agency in the early 1970s. And I remember, that's when I started this work in the early 70s. And people back then told me they just don't have time to work on deceptive food labeling. It's only economic fraud. It doesn't kill people. And the FDA's highest priority is to stop immediate deaths. And that's why foodborne illnesses are such a high priority. When there's an outbreak of E. coli poisonings and several people die, that gets headlines, and the FDA has to work on it. And that really is what terrifies the public. And the food industry recognizes that. And we've worked actually very closely with the food industry and drug industry to get FDA greater funding to work on food issues, not specifying what issue it is. But kind of the bigger picture, so what about deaths that don't occur so quickly, like from trans fat or salt, that are causing maybe 100,000 deaths each year? Just an enormous number. But the dead bodies don't have a tag in them saying it was salt that did it. And that makes the issue a very low priority. And the FDA does have to work on food poisonings, but there should be enough resources to work on other things. And they also fear losing. And we don't have to fear losing as much as the FDA does, because if the court interprets the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act in a very narrow way, that can hurt the agency for many years. So they don't want to take chances. So, thank you very much.